My name is Celeste Beaumont. I'm 30 years old, and if you had asked me that night what I was about to lose, I would have said nothing. Because from the outside, it already felt like I had learned how to survive loss. Grief has a way of doing that. It reshapes your expectations, lowers them quietly, almost kindly, until something happens that reminds you just how much more there is left to break. That night wasn't supposed to be one of those moments. It was supposed to be ordinary. Just another visit. Just another conversation with the people who raised me, the people I thought I understood. I was wrong. The first time I realized my parents were capable of stealing from their own granddaughter was the day my mother told me, casually, like she was mentioning the weather, that the painting was already gone. Sold. And the money? Already spent. $120,000. That's what they sold it for. The painting that had hung in my grandfather's study for over 50 years. The one he left specifically, clearly, to my daughter, Lily. 8 years old. Too young to understand its value, maybe. But that was never the point. It was meant for her future. Not for Clara's kitchen. I didn't even hear it from them directly. I found out because my older sister, Clara, posted photos online. Bright, polished, smiling pictures of her long overdue renovation. Marble countertops, custom cabinets, a redesigned backyard that looked like something out of a magazine. And buried in the comments, one line from my aunt. Glad Dad's old painting finally paid off. I remember staring at that sentence like it didn't belong in the same world as me. Like maybe I had misunderstood. I hadn't. When I drove to my parents' house that night, I already knew. I just didn't want to believe it. The moment I stepped inside, I saw it. The wall above the fireplace. Empty. Not just empty, marked. A faint rectangular shadow where the painting had been, slightly darker than the rest of the wall. Like a ghost of something that had been taken too quickly. Too quietly. My mother opened the door like nothing had happened. Like I wasn't standing there trying to hold myself together. I didn't greet her. I didn't sit down. I just asked, "Where is it?" She didn't hesitate. "We sold it," she said. "Private collector. Good money." Good money. I remember the way those words sounded. Light. Almost satisfied. Lily wouldn't appreciate it anyway. That was when something inside me shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just permanently. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. "Of course she can't appreciate it yet," I said slowly. "She's 8. My father stepped in before my mother could respond. "It's just a painting, Celeste," he said, his voice firm in that familiar way that used to end arguments before they began. "Clara needed the help more. Lily has you." That sentence hit harder than I expected. Lily has you. As if that made everything else optional. As if what belonged to her could be reassigned based on convenience. "That painting didn't belong to you," I said. For the first time, they looked confused. Actually confused. My mother crossed her arms. "We're the executors," she said. "We handled the estate. It was easier this way." Easier for who? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Silence followed. Not the kind that resolves things. The kind that exposes them. "My grandfather was clear," I continued, my voice steadier now. "The painting was left to Lily. It's in the will." I had read it twice after he passed. Twice, because something in me needed to hold on to certainty. My father exhaled, like I was being unreasonable. "It's family, Celeste," he said. We're not outsiders. We made a decision that helped your sister. Helped. That word again. Always framed like generosity. Never like taking. I looked between them, searching for something. Regret, hesitation, anything that suggested they understood what they had done. There was nothing. Just certainty. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. And they had already justified it. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Every red light stretched, every turn felt delayed, like the world itself was trying to give me more time to process something I wasn't ready to accept. But one thought kept circling back. One name. Henry. My grandfather's older brother. 86 years old, and still sharper than anyone I knew. He had always been quiet, observant, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it mattered. If anyone would understand what my grandfather intended, it would be him. I called him before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the second ring. "Celeste," he said, like he had been expecting me. That alone made my chest tighten. I told him everything. The sale. The money, Clara's renovation, the will. There was a pause when I finished. Not short, not uncertain.
Deliberate.
I expected anger.
Disappointment.
Something. Instead, he laughed. Softly. Not mocking. Not amused in the way I expected. Just knowing. "Come by in the morning," he said. "Bring the will." That was it. No lecture. No reaction. Just instruction. I barely slept that night. By the time I arrived at his house the next morning, the sky still felt too quiet, like the world hadn't caught up to what was about to unfold. Henry was already sitting at his kitchen table. In front of him was something I had never seen before. An old wooden box, worn at the edges, closed, waiting. He gestured for me to sit. "Read the clause," he said. I opened the copy of the will with slightly trembling hands and found the section I knew almost by memory. The painting. Lily's name. Clear. Undeniable. I read it out loud. When I finished, Henry nodded slowly. Almost satisfied. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. I was wondering how long it would take. The words hung in the air.
Heavy. Unavoidable.
"What do you mean?" I asked. He leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "That painting," he said, "was never just decoration." Something in his tone shifted.
Subtle.
But enough. "It was left to Lily for a reason," he continued. "Not sentimental."
Strategic.
The word landed harder than anything else had so far.
Strategic.
I felt my pulse in my throat. "What kind of strategy?" I asked. Henry didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for the wooden box. Slowly.
Carefully.
Like whatever was inside mattered more than the conversation itself. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't considered before. This wasn't just about what my parents had done. It was about something much bigger. Something my grandfather had planned. And something my parents had just triggered. Henry looked up at me, his expression calm in a way that made everything feel more serious. "Call your parents," he said. "Invite them here." I hesitated. "They're not going to like this." He gave a small, knowing smile. "No," he said. "They're not." He rested his hand lightly on the box. "But it's time." My parents arrived at Henry's house that afternoon, already wearing their defense like armor. My mother walked in first, purse tight under her arm, chin lifted just enough to make it clear she had no intention of apologizing. My father followed behind her, quieter, but not uncertain. He had that same expression I had seen the night before, the one that said he believed the matter was inconvenient, not wrong. I sat at the kitchen table beside Henry. The wooden box was still there,
Closed.
waiting. My mother looked at it, then at me. "So this is an intervention now?" she asked. Henry didn't react. He simply gestured toward the empty chairs. "Sit down." They did, though neither of them looked pleased about it. My father spoke first. "Henry, with respect, Celeste is upset. We understand that. But this has gotten blown out of proportion." My mother nodded quickly. "Exactly. Lily is 8. She doesn't know anything about art. Clara needed help now. We kept the money in the family." Kept the money in the family. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked down at my hands beneath the table and pressed my fingertips together until they hurt. Henry let her finish. He always did that. Let people talk long enough to reveal themselves. Then he folded his hands neatly on the table and smiled. Not warmly. Not cruelly. Just calmly. "The painting was not fully yours to sell," he said. The room went quiet. My father blinked. "What does that mean?" Henry opened the wooden box. Inside were folders, envelopes, old photographs, papers bound with clips that looked older than I was. He pulled out one thin folder and laid it on the table. "The painting was co-owned," he said. "Your father and I purchased it together in 1974. We split the cost. We signed a private agreement." My mother's expression tightened. "That's impossible." Henry didn't look at her. "When your father died, his share went to Lily. Mine did not." For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. "The will doesn't mention co-ownership." "Of course it doesn't," Henry said. "Your father assumed no one in this family would ever try to sell it." That landed like a slap. My mother's face flushed. "We didn't try to steal anything." Henry slid the document across the table. "Read it." My father reached for it first. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but the signatures were still clear. My grandfather's. Henry's. A notary stamp from decades ago. I watched my father's eyes move across the page. At first, slowly. Then again, faster. My mother leaned over his shoulder. Her confidence began to change shape. The agreement stated that neither party could sell the painting without written consent from the other. If one share transferred through inheritance, the restrictions still applied. They had sold the entire painting. Without asking me. Without asking Henry. Without even knowing they had no authority to do it. My father put the paper down carefully. Too carefully. "Why are you only bringing this up now?" Henry's eyes sharpened. "Because I didn't know it had been sold until Celeste called me." Then he added, almost gently, "The buyer contacted me yesterday." My mother's face changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. Fear had entered the room. "How would the buyer even know about you?" she asked. Henry leaned back. "Because the painting is listed in a private registry under both our names. Serious collectors check these things. After the sale, the buyer ran a routine provenance verification. My name surfaced." My father's jaw tightened. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth," Henry said, "that half the painting had been sold illegally." My father stood up so abruptly the chair scraped against the floor. "The sale is final." Henry looked up at him calmly. "No, it isn't." My mother gripped her purse tighter. The money has already been wired. Conditionally, Henry said. That single word seemed to stop the air. He continued. Once the buyer learned there was a co-ownership issue, the funds were placed in escrow, pending clarification. What you received was an advance. It can be reversed. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father remained standing. For the first time, he didn't look angry. He looked like someone trying to do math in a burning room. Henry reached into the box again. There is another issue. I looked at him. I hadn't known there was more. He pulled out a second document.
Newer.
Cleaner. This appraisal was completed 2 years before your father died. My father sat back down slowly. Henry placed the document on the table. The painting was not worth $120,000. My mother whispered, "What?" Henry's voice stayed even. It was insured for $1.8 million. The silence after that was so complete, I could hear the old refrigerator humming in the corner. My father laughed once.
Short. Disbelieving.
That's not possible. It is, Henry said. The artist's work surged in value after a major retrospective in Chicago. That painting is one of only 3 from that period still in private hands. My mother looked sick. But the gallery said, the gallery offered what someone offers when they believe they're dealing with uninformed sellers. I felt something cold move through me. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Something heavier. Because suddenly, this wasn't only betrayal. It was ruin. My parents had sold Lily's future for pennies compared to what it was worth, and they had done it with the confidence of people who believed no one would ever question them. My father rubbed a hand over his face. So, what does the buyer want? Henry didn't answer immediately. That pause made my chest tighten. The buyer is not just a collector, he said. He is an attorney who specializes in art fraud litigation. My mother's hands went still. My father stared at Henry. No. Yes. The word fell quietly.
Final.
Henry folded his hands again. I told him I would give you a chance to correct this before he proceeds. Proceeds? My father asked. His voice had changed. It was smaller now. Henry looked at me instead of them when he answered. If this is not fixed immediately, it becomes criminal. My mother shook her head. No, this is family. This is a misunderstanding. Henry did not argue. That almost made it worse. He simply explained the position they were in. The buyer had documentation of the sale. The gallery had wire records. The registry listed both owners. The private agreement showed written consent had never been obtained. That alone could void the sale. But it didn't stop there. When you signed the transfer documents, Henry said, you declared the painting was free of competing ownership claims. My father's eyes closed briefly. That statement is legally binding. My mother's voice trembled. What does that mean in practical terms? It means the buyer can pursue civil damages for misrepresentation, Henry said. And depending on how the funds were handled, possibly criminal charges for fraud.
Fraud.
The word changed the room. It made everything smaller.
Sharper.
More real. I looked at my parents and saw something I had never seen before. Not regret. Not yet. But fear. Fear of consequences. Fear of exposure. Fear of finally being unable to explain their way out of something. My mother turned to me then. Celeste, she said, and for the first time her voice softened. You know we weren't trying to hurt Lily. I wanted to believe that mattered. but all I could think about was the empty wall above their fireplace. The ghost rectangle. The comment online. The way she had said Lily wouldn't appreciate it anyway. You didn't think about Lily at all, I said. Her eyes filled, but she looked away before the tears could fall. Henry continued. The buyer is willing to unwind the sale quietly if the full advance is returned immediately and if a formal written apology acknowledges the error. My father's face tightened again. We don't have the money anymore. That was when my mother's phone rang. Clara. Of course. My mother answered quickly, probably hoping to escape the conversation for a moment. But she put it on speaker without realizing it. Clara's voice burst into the room, panicked and irritated. Mom, what is going on? The contractor said the latest payment didn't clear. He said something about a hold. Did you mess up the transfer? No one moved. My mother's face went pale. Clara, not now. What do you mean, not now? They already tore up the floors. Materials are ordered. I can't have this pause right in the middle. Henry looked at my father. My father looked away. That was when I understood. The renovation hadn't just been paid for once. It had been financed in stages. The initial deposit came from what my parents thought was the sale money. The rest was tied to a short-term bridge loan they had co-signed for Clara, using their own house as collateral. My stomach turned. They hadn't only taken Lily's painting. They had leveraged their future against money that was never legally theirs. My mother ended the call quickly. Henry asked one question. How much of the advance is untouched? My father didn't answer at first. Then he said, barely above a whisper, less than 40,000. My mother looked at him like he had betrayed her by saying it out loud. Henry's expression did not change. Then you need to contact Clara tonight. The renovation stops immediately. Every dollar that can be recovered comes back. My mother snapped. She'll be devastated. Henry looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, if you don't stop it now, devastation will be the least of what happens. My father leaned forward. There has to be another way. Maybe we can renegotiate with the buyer. He paid $120,000. Maybe he accepts that and walks away. Henry's gaze hardened. You sold a $1.8 million painting for a fraction of its value without full ownership. There is no renegotiation. He closed the folder. Only damage control. And then, just when I thought there couldn't be anything worse, Henry reached back into the wooden box. There is one more thing you should know. My mother's face drained. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. Henry removed another set of papers. This appraisal was part of a larger estate strategy your father created before he died. I leaned forward. What strategy? Henry looked at me first. Softly this time. The painting wasn't only left to Lily, he said. It was placed into a protective trust structure that activates if the asset is mishandled. My mother whispered, What does that mean? Henry pointed to a section of the document. It means that if an executor knowingly disposes of the asset against the restrictions attached to it, the trust is empowered to initiate legal recovery automatically. My father stared at the paper. Who controls the trust? Henry didn't hesitate. I do. No one spoke. Not my mother. Not my father. Not me. The silence felt heavier than any accusation. Because now we all understood. My grandfather hadn't just left Lily a painting. He had left her protection. And my parents had walked straight into it. The silence didn't break. It settled. Heavy, suffocating, unavoidable. My mother was the first to speak, her voice lower now, stripped of the certainty she had walked in with. This is still family, she said. We can fix this privately. Henry didn't respond right away. He simply reached for his phone. As if on cue, it rang. He glanced at the screen, then stood up. "It's the buyer's attorney," he said. "Excuse me." He stepped into the hallway, but the house was quiet enough that fragments of the conversation drifted back to us anyway. "Yes, they're here." "No, they weren't aware of the full value." "I understand. I'll confirm within 24 hours. Each sentence felt like a countdown. When Henry returned, something in his expression had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "The situation has developed," he said as he sat back down. My father frowned. "Developed how?" Henry folded his hands again. "The painting was scheduled to be featured in an upcoming exhibition." I felt my stomach drop. "And now," he continued, "it cannot be located in the registry as legally transferred." My mother's voice barely held. "What does that mean?" "It means," Henry said calmly, "that the authorities are already reviewing the sale." Authorities. The word landed like a physical weight. My father shook his head immediately. "This is getting exaggerated. It was a private sale." Henry's gaze didn't shift. "Not anymore." He explained it simply, almost clinically. The moment the painting was listed for exhibition, the hosting institution reviewed its provenance. The registry flagged co-ownership. The trust restriction surfaced. The museum's legal department escalated it. What had started as a quiet decision made in a living room had now reached people who did not care about family explanations. Only facts. Only documents. My mother's hands began to shake. "We didn't know about any trust," she said. "We were just trying to help Clara." Henry's voice stayed steady. "Intent does not erase signatures." That sentence seemed to echo. He looked directly at my parents. "Did you disclose the trust clause to the gallery?" My father didn't answer. He didn't need to. That silence said everything. Henry nodded once. Failing to disclose a material restriction tied to inherited property can be interpreted as deliberate concealment. My mother shook her head quickly. "The gallery handled everything fast. We trusted the specialist." Henry didn't argue. "The specialist likely suspected the piece was undervalued. That's why the buyer verified the registry independently." Of course he did. Because serious buyers didn't rely on assumptions. They verified. And in doing so, they uncovered everything my parents had overlooked or ignored. I leaned forward slightly. "What happens next?" Henry looked at me this time. "The buyer's attorney has already filed a provisional notice to freeze any remaining funds tied to the transaction. If repayment isn't initiated immediately, a formal complaint will follow." My father finally said the words we had all been avoiding. "Criminal?" Henry nodded once. "Yes." The room felt smaller again, like the walls had shifted inward. My mother pressed her hands together, her voice trembling now in a way that felt unfamiliar. "They wouldn't actually do that over something like this." Henry didn't soften it. "They already are." And then, as if that wasn't enough, my mother said something that changed everything again. "Maybe," she began, her voice unsteady but defensive, "maybe the painting should never have gone to Lily in the first place." I felt something inside me go still. She continued, "Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. He could have made a mistake." Henry's expression changed. For the first time, not anger. Not exactly, but something sharper. More final. "Your father amended that clause 6 months before he died," he said. "After a full evaluation, he was very clear." Then he looked at me. And what he said next made my chest tighten. 2 weeks before he passed, he asked me to document everything carefully. Why? I asked quietly. Henry held my gaze. Because he anticipated pressure from within the family.
Pressure.
The word settled heavily. I didn't need him to explain it. Clara had always struggled financially, and my parents had always stepped in.
Quietly. Repeatedly.
My grandfather had refused to support that pattern. That had created tension. Years of it. Tension that had never been loud, but had never disappeared either. Henry leaned back slightly. He believed someone might try to liquidate the painting under the assumption that a child wouldn't notice. My mother started crying then. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet unraveling. We're not criminals, she said. Henry didn't argue. That was what made it unbearable. Because he didn't need to. He simply said, "This can still be corrected, but only if you act immediately, completely." At that exact moment, my father's phone rang. Clara. Again. He hesitated, then stood and stepped outside to answer. Through the front window, I could see him pacing across the driveway. Back and forth. Faster each time. When he came back inside, his face had lost all color. "What is it?" my mother asked. His voice came out strained. "The contractor received a legal notice." The words barely felt real. "What kind of notice?" I asked. "They've paused work," he said, "until clarification." Henry nodded slightly. "Standard procedure." My mother shook her head. "This is insane." Henry didn't react. "It's predictable." My father ran a hand through his hair. "They traced the payments," he said. "The buyer's legal team. They flagged the renovation funds as potentially recoverable assets tied to disputed proceeds." I felt my stomach twist. Everything was connected. Every decision. Every shortcut. Every assumption. My mother whispered, "They can't do that." "They can," Henry said. "And they will." And then my father said something that made everything worse. Something I don't think he had planned to admit. "When we signed the bridge loan for Clara's renovation," he began slowly, "we listed the painting sale as confirmed income." Henry closed his eyes briefly. Just for a second. But it was enough. "If that income is now legally contested," he said, "the loan application may also be considered fraudulent."
Fraud.
Again. Heavier this time. Because now, it wasn't just one mistake. It was a chain. My mother looked between them, her voice breaking. "What are we supposed to do?" Henry didn't hesitate. "There is only one option left." He spoke each part clearly. Full disclosure, immediate repayment of every dollar, written acknowledgement of unauthorized sale, full cooperation before formal charges are filed. My father swallowed. "How long do we have?" Henry checked his phone. 24 hours. Then he added, more quietly, "If they file first, this doesn't stay civil. It becomes criminal. And once that happens, I won't be able to stop it." That night stretched endlessly. My parents left to go to Clara's house. To explain. To try to fix something that was already collapsing. I didn't go with them. I stayed with Henry. He worked at the kitchen table, drafting a formal notice, repayment terms, acknowledgement of breach, language that felt cold and necessary. "Clarity now," he said, "can mean leniency later." Around midnight, my father called. I watched Henry answer, listened as his side of the conversation stayed calm, measured. Then he handed the phone to me. "Celeste," my father said, his voice tight. Clara won't stop the renovation. Of course she wouldn't. She says the contractors are already paid, he continued. Materials are ordered. She says no one would actually press charges over a family misunderstanding. I closed my eyes. Because that word again.
Misunderstanding.
As if that could undo signatures. Paper trails.
Legal declarations.
Henry took the phone back. He spoke directly this time. Explained, again, what was already happening. That forensic accounting had been requested. That repayment needed to be complete. That time was running out. When he hung up, he didn't say anything right away. He didn't need to. We both knew. By morning, my parents had done what they could. They liquidated a retirement account. Wired back as much as possible. But it wasn't enough. Nearly $30,000 were still tied up in Clara's renovation. Money that couldn't be returned in time. At exactly 3:17 p.m., Henry's phone buzzed. He read the message silently, then placed the phone down. They filed, he said. My mother, sitting across from him, went completely still. What does that mean? My father asked. Henry's voice was steady. It means this is no longer just a dispute. He paused. A criminal complaint has been filed. Fraudulent misrepresentation. Unlawful sale of jointly owned property. The words settled like final verdicts. My mother sank into the chair. My father didn't speak. And for the first time, there was nothing left to argue. By 6 that evening, it stopped feeling like something that might still be contained. It became real. Not in the abstract way Henry had been explaining all day. Not in legal terms or documents or hypotheticals. Real in the way that changes how people look at you. How they speak. How they stop speaking. The detectives called first. 2 of them. Polite. Measured. Almost apologetic in tone. They asked my parents if they would be available to answer a few questions regarding the sale of the painting, the ownership structure, and the financial disclosures connected to it. My mother kept repeating the same sentence. It was a misunderstanding. Over and over again. As if saying it enough times might reshape what had already happened. My father agreed to meet them. Of course he did. At that point, there wasn't much else he could do. They arrived 2 days later. No uniforms. No urgency. Just quiet professionalism. I was there when they sat down at my parents' kitchen table. The same table where so many ordinary dinners had happened, where nothing had ever felt irreversible before. Now everything did. They asked questions. Simple at first. Who owned the painting? Who authorized the sale? What documentation was reviewed before signing? Each answer led to the same place.
A signature. A declaration.
A statement that the painting was free of competing ownership claims. A statement that wasn't true. Clara tried to help. She framed it the way she always had, emotionally, defensively. They were just helping me, she said. This is family. But that only made it worse. Because the investigators weren't interested in intentions. They were interested in facts. And the facts were already laid out. Registry records. The co-ownership agreement. The appraisal. The trust documents. The signed transfer statements. Everything lined up in a way that left very little room for interpretation. Within a week, formal charges were filed.
Fraudulent misrepresentation.
Unlawful conversion of jointly owned property. And because of the loan application, because my parents had listed the painting proceeds as confirmed income, a separate financial fraud charge was added. I remember the exact morning it happened. Not because anything dramatic took place, but because nothing did. It was quiet. Almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels unnatural. My mother stood in the hallway when they came. She didn't resist. She didn't raise her voice. She just kept saying the same thing, over and over, like she was trying to anchor herself to it. We were just helping family. My father didn't say much at all. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in a way that's hard to explain. Like something essential had been stripped away. They were taken without a scene. No shouting. No struggle. Just the sound of a door closing behind them. Final in a way I hadn't expected. Clara wasn't there. She arrived later. Too late to see it happen, but not too late to feel it. The renovation stopped completely.
Mid-project.
Floors torn up. Walls half finished. Materials sitting unopened in corners. The house stayed like that for months. A physical reminder of something that had started with confidence and ended in silence. The painting was returned to escrow. Handled carefully this time.
Legally. Deliberately.
Under court supervision, it was transferred properly into Lily's trust, where it should have been all along. The buyer withdrew from the exhibition, but he didn't withdraw the complaint. That part stayed. Because for him, it had never been about the painting alone. It was about what had been declared, what had been signed, what had been misrepresented. Henry told me later that my grandfather had expected something like this. Not hoped for it, but anticipated it. He knew, Henry said quietly one evening, that greed doesn't always look like greed at first. I didn't ask what he meant. I already understood. It looks like justification, like urgency, like helping one person at the expense of another. It looks like believing you'll never be questioned. Lily still doesn't fully understand what happened. She knows the painting belonged to her. She knows it's important. And she knows that it's safe now. What she doesn't know is how close it came to disappearing from her life completely. Or how many decisions were made, quietly and confidently, that nearly made that happen. Sometimes I think about that night again. The empty wall. The outline where the painting used to be. At the time, it felt like something had been taken. Now I realize that was only the beginning. Because what followed wasn't just about a painting. It was about everything that had been assumed to be unbreakable. Family. Trust. Boundaries. All of it tested. All of it changed. Some things were recovered. Others weren't. And some never will be.